My talk will be about Flutter Web and the things that you should know while developing for Flutter Web. So firstly, I'm going to outline some basic differences and maybe some drawbacks, because let's be real, Flutter Web is still not like 100% ready for production. And there are also some limitations of what you can do. But if your app falls into a category that is suitable for Flutter Web, then you will definitely benefit from having just one code base and not having to branch out and write in JavaScript or TypeScript or what have you. So this is a working slide. So Flutter Web versus regular web, right? What is the difference? For Flutter Web, you need to have sort of an idea that when you write an app with Flutter Web, you are really writing a mobile app that is going to run in your browser, right? You are not writing a regular, right, web app. So this needs to be a mobile first development in the true sense of the word, because usually mobile first means that scaling of the UI and everything will look optimized on the mobile devices. But here, you should really first write the app that it's just UX-wise, everything, it's perfect for mobile. And perhaps only afterwards are you going to migrate to the web. Because, for example, one thing that comes to my mind is that Flutter Web does not support SEO. So search engines like Google will not be able to index your Flutter Web site. And that's a problem if you're writing a blog. So probably you are not going to write a blog page in Flutter. But what you are going to write in Flutter Web, those are the kind of like real web apps that operate sort of like a mobile app. Then there are, of course, some performance issues, but they're getting fixed and they're really good about fixing these issues. So issues are disappearing, if not day by day, then month by month, definitely. And one of the big drawbacks is that there is no hard reload. So that's just the way it is. Hard reload is only supported on Dart VM. So that's why whenever you transpile to JavaScript from Dart, you just lose this hard reload feature. But that would be enough for drawbacks, but they needed to be said because unless you have them in mind, you're going to be fairly disappointed about Flutter Web, in my opinion. But now that you know what it can do and what it cannot do, with this in mind, you can actually build some really great applications with Flutter Web, but you just need to know about these drawbacks that are definitely there. So the most important thing about writing apps for Flutter Web is the mindset shift. You need to stop thinking about this kind of a division between Flutter code and the platform code. So if you were writing mobile apps with Flutter, you would have platform code of Swift or Kotlin, right, for iOS and Android. And you really cannot write native code in Dart. That's impossible. For it, you need to write plugins which are actually written in the respective language. So that is either Swift or Objective-C or Java and Kotlin, right? You cannot write Dart code to, for example, show the truly native toast on Android, or you cannot write Dart code that will show native notification on iOS. You need to write a plugin, communicate through the bridge over to the native platform, right? And then that's when you can actually display the notification. That's when you can display the native plugin. But that's only possible from the actual Kotlin or Swift code. But with Flutter for Web, this sort of boundary changes that really there is not a lot of the boundary left between the Flutter code and the platform code. That's because Flutter web applications, they are being transpiled from Dart to JavaScript, of course. And because they are transpiled, the whole Dart code that you write, it is actually just JavaScript once it runs, right? And also because of the history, of course, this is true also for Android and iOS. Flutter runs as a native application on both of those platforms. But the difference is this. Because of Dart's history of initially it should have been something like you could have seen with Angular Dart. Dart was basically Google's answer for TypeScript, we could say. Whichever way you put it, Dart was initially meant to be just transpiled to JavaScript, right? It's very developed in this area. It transpiles wonderfully. And because it is transpiled to JavaScript, and it has such a long history of being transpiled to JavaScript, it has all the basic APIs and even not so basic APIs covered. So you can, for example, open up new browser windows from your Dart code. You can display alerts from your Dart code. You can do display even like those native kind of notifications which appear on your actual computer or on your mobile phone when you are using a website. You can do all of this from just pure Dart code, which includes Flutter code. So whenever you are writing Flutter for the web, you need to realize that, hey, I actually don't have this boundary. I don't need to always go for plugins whenever I want to do something native on the web. I can just write it directly in my Dart code base. Now, whether or not you should do it, that's a different question. Plugins still have a meaningful place when you are writing Flutter web apps. For example, if you have functionality of a plugin for Android and iOS, then it obviously makes sense to also support the web in the actual plugin and not to write the web implementation in just your own app, because you want to actually package that functionality into one single plugin package for obvious reasons, so that you have all the platforms supported from just one plugin. But still, even though you should be putting your Flutter Web native code into the respective plugins that you write or use, it's not necessary, unlike with Android and iOS and also desktop, where you absolutely need to write your plugins. So let's now take a look at one of the most basic things we can do, and that is showing an alert from our Flutter Web application. So I am now just going to hop here, and we have main.dart. There are multiple things we're going to be doing throughout this Meetup presentation. But now I actually want to show alert page, which will be from slide 7. This, all right. So let's just take a look at how it works, and then we're going to take a look at the implementation. So I'm going to be running for Chrome, Web JavaScript. Let me launch this. Actually, in the meantime, while it's launching, let's check out the implementation. It will be quicker. So here, all we are doing is we are within a regular Dart stateless widget, or Flutter stateless widget, should I say. And we just have a simple elevated button. And when we press it, we say window.alert. And then we have, this is an alert coming straight from the browser, right? We use this web functionality directly from our widget, right? We can show alert once I drag it here, right? We can show alert, and we see a regular browser alert here, right? It looks like just from regular JavaScript code. That's because it is. This code has been transpiled to JavaScript, and whatever we have written in our onPressed callback is actually running as JavaScript once it was transpiled, and now it's running on in our web browser. And to prove that this is actually the native browser alert, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this address to the local host on my machine, and I'm going to open up Safari. Once okay, here we go. And so I'm going to paste this here. So again, it's localhost, right? It's still running, so we're going to be able to connect there even through Safari, or we at least should be able to. Very, very interesting. Of course, it has worked previously. Now it doesn't. Let me just check this. Oh, it works now. All right. It just needed a bit of time to get going. So now I'm going to show alert here. And you see it looks completely differently. It looks native to Safari, but what we call is still the same thing. So it's just calling the native browser APIs, right? Now, what we've done here is awesome. We are able to show native browser alerts from our Flutter code. But the problem is that, well, the code is now broken. And in which way is it broken? Well, let me show you this. So if I now change the target of our app from Chrome to, let's say, Mac OS, because it just builds in the fastest time on the Mac. So I will now launch this on Mac OS. And after a while, we are going to see that wait for it. It cannot even be built, yet alone launched properly. So what happened here? It says, yeah, basically that window doesn't exist, right? This window we're calling isn't defined. Not found, Dart.html, import Dart.html. So this Dart.html library is just not available on Mac OS. The same goes for Android, iOS, Linux, Windows, everything. The only place where this Dart.html is actually available and imported, it will just import it properly, is on the web. That's actually why we have this blue squiggly line below Dart.html saying avoid using web-only libraries outside Flutter Web plugin packages, which kind of makes sense because it just doesn't work otherwise. So now I'm going to talk about how to overcome this issue and still be able to just, well, use JavaScript functionality directly from your Flutter app without putting it into a plugin. Because although plugins are very, very useful for certain use cases, sometimes it's actually quite nice if you can write web code directly inside of your app. Perhaps it's the feature you're implementing is just so simple and you're not going to be using it so often that making a plugin for it is just insanity. And this is especially useful if Dart code works properly on mobile, but only for the web, there is something that you need to do in a special manner, that's when not putting your code into a plugin actually makes a lot of sense. So let's take a look at how we can overcome this. So this is in this slide aid folder in this project. So we're no longer going to be calling window.alert directly from the alert page. Instead of calling window.alert, we now call a method called showAlert. So where is this showAlert coming from? Well, this showAlert is coming from not just one file, but 3 files. And we do conditional imports to determine when to import which file. So let's take a close look at this so that it makes sense. Firstly, we create a stub. Now we call this stub, then we have sort of implementations of this stub. And this approach, you can think of it in the same way as when you create an abstract class or an interface. You create an abstract class which doesn't have any implementation by itself, but it allows you to switch the implementations by using different classes which inherit from or implement that abstract class. This is the same concept here. We have this stub, which doesn't have any implementation. In fact, it throws the unimplemented error, right? It accepts string message, build context, but doesn't do anything. And then we have the web implementation of this stub, showAlert. Again, the interface should match. Here it's not enforced, but it should match the interface of the stub. So we, again, even in the showAlert web, we have the same interface. Void showAlert, accepting string message, and build context. But here we actually do perform some functionality. So in the case of the web implementation, we call again window.alert. We again get the blue squiggly line below Dart HTML that it should not be imported here, but in this case, it's actually going to be fine because of the conditional import. So this file will not be compiled on Mac or on Android. So it will not cause the build to fail because it will not be entered into the build because it's conditionally not imported, should I say. So it's going to be left out from the build. And on showAlert mobile, again, the interface of the stub file is preserved. And here we just show dialog, alert dialog. Of course, this showing of a dialog would also work on the web, but let's just say that for some reason on the web, we have a command from the client that the client wants to see the native browser alert for whenever the customers of that company use the web version of the app, but the customers of the company should be seeing the Flutter or Material alert when using Mac OS, Android, or iOS, right? So now with all of these 3 files properly implemented, as I've shown you, from the alert page itself, we are going to conditionally import the stub in a way where we import the mobile version of the stub if Dart library.io, which kind of looks weird at first glance, but actually what this means, if Dart library.io exists, which means we are somewhere basically, which is not the web, because as some of you surely know, the IO library just doesn't work on the web, which has been a cause of many troubles. And then if Dart library HTML exists, and by now you know that HTML library exists only when you are building for the web, then we use showAlert web sort of implementation of this stub file, right? And since the interface for all of these implementations is the same, we can just then call show alert. And now if I go to main.dart and change to use the slide 8 alert page, which means the alert page where we call show alert nicely. And now I'm going to run this on Mac. It is actually going to run properly and the functionality will be there. This should run fairly quickly. Then, of course, the web application will run fine as well. So we are on Mac, show alert, boom. This is an alert coming straight from the browser or from Flutter, if not on the web. Currently, we are not running in a web browser, so it is the alert from Flutter, we can say. But if we switch to Chrome being the target again, boom, we are going to see that it runs properly again. In the meantime, while this is building, let's now talk about another thing, and that is how to use a web view on the web. So it switched me automatically away from this slide. Okay, so on the web, the alert still works. Everything is nicely displayed. So we know that everything works. So how to actually use a web view on the web? The answer is that you don't use a web view on the web because it's not supported on the web. So what can you do if you cannot use WebView, right? So surely you have some instances where you just want to display web content in your Flutter app. Whether that is that you want to display some HTML that you get from some API, or you just want to embed some regular website, whatever the reason may be, displaying or embedding other web content in your Flutter Web app is definitely a useful and quite necessary thing to do. But the WebView plugin leaves us empty-handed. So what can we do to overcome this seeming limitation of Flutter Web? But once you see how you can actually display web content, I think you'll realize that this is not even a limitation. I actually like this much more than the WebView on Android or iOS. So by the end of my explanatory efforts, we're going to be able, or you're going to understand of what we're doing here. We have a Flutter website page widget, and inside of it, we just return a single widget from the build method, which is called web display, and we pass a URI here of flutter.dev. And once we actually run this, so you can see the result immediately. Right, once we run this Flutter website page widget on the web, it will just look directly like we have opened the flutter.dev website. Right, you're not going to see any difference, except for one thing, of course. which is that, because now this website, which is going to pop up here in just a bit, is not the actual, well, it is the actual Flutter.dev website. It's just not running there. It's running embedded in our app, in our website. Now the URI says localhost, not Flutter.dev, and also the title is material app. But besides that, there is no difference, right? You can go anywhere, you can click get started. Of course, the URL up top will not change because, again, we are running within something called an iframe, which many of you probably have already thought about of how to do it. But besides that, it works swiftly, it works very nice. Everything is good. So how in the world can we achieve this kind of a thing? Again, we are going to employ the tricks you have already learned, which is with the conditional import, as you can see, and with the stubs. So we are going to create the web display stub, and then web display mobile and web display web, and conditionally import them. The principles are exactly the same as previously when we were showing alerts. But in this case, the stub and the implementations will not contain just a single method for showing the alert. They will instead contain a fully blown widget called web display, which can accept a URI. And currently, the build method just throws unimplemented error because, of course, this is a stub, so it's not implemented. But how are we going to implement it for the mobile platforms, right? It's kind of obvious. We are going to actually use the Webview plugin, which I have previously added here into pub.dev or pub.dev, pub.camel, of course. If I could move this, wow, this zoom thing, I probably cannot. Oh, I can. Awesome. So we have Webview Flutter here. We're using this well-known package, and that's how we can display web content on the mobile platforms. I'm not even going to demonstrate that. It just works. If you open up your iOS or Android device running with this app, it's just going to look like a regular Webview looks on your mobile devices. But what's actually going on here in the web stub implementation? So let's take a look at the basics. Again, the interface is preserved. It's called web display, accepts a URI. Now it's actually a stateful widget, but that's fine. Like the interface is still preserved because, mobile is a stateless widget, but still it accepts a URI and has a build method, of course. And now this is a stateful widget, but still it accepts a URI. It has a build method in the associated state. So everything is all right in this area. And now what's going on here? So the way you can display or embed some other web content within your Flutter Web app is to, again, use the Dart HTML library and use the iframe element. Because if you think of a regular just HTML file, the way you would embed something in your web page, that is the way is by using an iframe element. So you would literally write iframe, right, and then close the tag, so on, inside of your HTML file, and through it, you would be able to embed something else into your web page. The same needs to happen for Flutter Web, but of course you cannot just write iframe like this because you're not writing HTML, but somehow this kind of a HTML thing needs to get into the Flutter Web application. So How are we going to do it? Well, with this iframe element. So we create late fields for the iframe element, also for an HTML view type, which is just a simple string, which should be unique. And inside of init state of this state, part of the stateful widget, we initialize iframe element. We set its source, which means the URL, to the one which is passed through the widget's constructor. So in our app's case, it's going to be flutter.dev. Right? Then we don't have to do this, but I do it here. You can really play around with many things when it comes to the iframe, or really to any element, because of course the iframe element is not the only thing you can work with in this manner. You can include every sort of an HTML element in your Flutter Web app, not just iframes. I'm just focusing on them because they're quite interesting, as you might imagine. And what we're doing here is that we are taking the style of this iframe element and we are setting the border width to 0 pixels, because otherwise it just looks a bit weird. It's sort of offset in a weird manner and I just don't like it. So we set the border width to 0 pixels. I'm not sure why it's not 0 pixels by default, but hey, it is what it is. And then we can sort of update the style by setting an attribute style, of course. We are literally working with plain HTML and CSS from within Dart, which is pretty cool. And we update this style attribute with the updated style, but we cannot just put CSS style declaration instance into this attribute. We just need to put in a string. And we can get a string out of this CSS style declaration by getting the CSS text, right? Now we have this unique HTML view type, and in init state, we use something called platform view registry to register a view factory for the HTML view type, which is this unique string. And it passes us a view ID, which we don't even use. And we just register the view factory iframe element. Now, I have a comment here that we are using a shim as not to get analyzer errors. I will come back to this later. You may have noticed that we have this Dart UI, fake Dart UI something in the shims folder here. That's what we are using. I'm going to come back to this later. But it's actually not so important, we could say, these shims. And what's happening now is that from the build method, we actually need to return some widget. And the way we can actually put this iframe elements embedded into our Flutter app is by sort of putting it inside this HTML element view. Why is that? You need to realize that the iframe element, it has nothing to do with Flutter. This is not a widget. This is an HTML element coming from the Dart HTML package. This HTML element or iframe element, this was available even way before Flutter even ever existed. This is just pure Dart thing. What we now need to do is to put this pure Dart thing into something that will make it work with Flutter. And that something is precisely this HTML element view. So how do we do that? We don't actually put this iframe element into HTML element view by itself. We use this unique identifier HTML view type, right? Which is registered like a key value pair. So the key is HTML view type string, and the value is this iframe element in the platform view registry, right? So this HTML element view will sort of look up this platform view registry, and it will say, hey, all right, for this HTML view type, what I should display is this iframe. That's what basically happens behind the scenes. We also provide a unique key for the key of the HTML element view. And once this is done, what happens is that the Flutter.dev website is now displayed in our Flutter Web app, which is running, as you could have already seen previously. But let's actually just run it one more time, because I will now start explaining the shims. And in the meantime, we can just wait for the build to be finished. So what's actually going on? Well, let's just wait for this to run once it started. So it works just as previously, as you can see. All right. So now let's talk about these shims. As I have written here in a comment, using a shim is not to get analyzer errors. So what do we have here? What is the shim all about? Well, now I am importing this shims.ui.dart as UI. Right? So what would happen if I just imported Dart UI as UI? What would happen then? Right? Well, then this would happen. If we just use the Dart UI directly to get the platform view registry and register something on it, we're going to get this error saying that the name platform view registry is being referenced through the prefix UI, but it isn't defined in any of the libraries imported using that prefix. So as if Dart UI just doesn't contain this platform view registry. That's because Dart UI contains it only when running on the web, and it's only available on runtime. So this Dart analyzer just thinks it's not available, although in the proper platform, it is available on the UI or Dart UI package library. So that's why we need to do this shenanigans with the shims. And so what is this shim all about? How does it look? So notice here that we are importing from the shims folder /dartui.dart as UI. We are importing it as a named import because then we can just use UI dot platform view registry, and that's what we do. But the actual implementation of this platform view registry, depending on the platform or whether or not this platform view registry is available or not, sort of is different code that runs behind the scenes. So what's going on in Dart UI fake, which is the actual file we are importing, right? Here in the web display web, we are importing this Dart UI. And so what happens here is that if and only if the current app is running on the web, do we import Dart UI, right? Otherwise, what we do is that we use this Dart UI fake, which contains a class, but it sort of doesn't look like a class because it has lowercase first letter, but it still is a class, platform view registry. And it also contains the register factory static method on it, which doesn't do absolutely anything. That's because this is just a Dart UI fake. It just is here so that it fulfills the interface which is prescribed, but it doesn't do absolutely anything. And that's why, because this Dart UI file will ensure that this Dart UI fake is actually being used and checked by the Dart analyzer as we are writing code. That's why we can actually say UI.platform view registry without any trouble, and the Dart analyzer will give us a pass. Now, since we still have a bit of time, the last thing, which is sort of obvious for maybe some of you, but if you are just a beginner coming into Flutter Web, because of perhaps that you didn't have that mindset shift yet, that, yeah, I'm writing for Flutter Web, but this is not the same thing as writing for Flutter Android or Flutter iOS. In Flutter Web, I can actually use native functionality of the web browser, and I am actually writing a real web app where the line between what is considered native JavaScript code and Dart code is sort of blurred, unlike with mobile Flutter apps. If you don't have this mindset shift yet, what I'm going to do now may not really occur to you at all. So what's possible to do on a Flutter Web app is to actually create just a regular HTML file or JavaScript file or CSS file in the web folder. Here I have created it. It's called another file, .html. And from it, you can do whatever you want. Here, I don't even have any body in this HTML file. I just have a script, which immediately, once this file runs, it's displayed, it's going to show an alert call saying you are now being alerted, right? So once this runs, it opens up Google Chrome here. Perhaps this is it. Yeah, this is it. And now I say localhost / another file .html. What's going to happen is we have this alert. This HTML file, including all the scripts inside of it, has run. It's being displayed. And now I can come back to the actual Flutter app. Boom. Right, so this is not something huge, and I've left it for the end just so that you will really understand that we are building a real web app which can do all the things a regular JavaScript web app can do. JavaScript single page application, should I say, basically, although this is not single page, you add another file to what is a single page application, but you can do the same thing in Angular, for example, too, if you so desire. So you're really building a regular web app, even when using Flutter Web. So that's what I would like the takeaway from this presentation to be, that when building for Flutter Web, you are truly building a web app, and you need to view it a bit differently than when building for mobile or desktop. So thank you for staying with us on this live stream.